is starting to, it's funny because I think in the beginning of each chapter, when I talk about the tools, I say, just pause and see if you can be with yourself for 5 or 10 minutes, because so much of it is not reacting to what's happening inside of us and starting to learn to identify, accept, tolerate, and experience feeling states. And when you've adapted for so long and repressed for so long, it's so hard to even know what's happening. I mean, you've known people, had clients for years that just stay busy every single second of their day because they don't even know they can.
You will love this conversation. Sarah Michaud is the author of Co-Crazy, One Psychologist's Recovery from Codependency and Addiction. Sarah is funny, caring, and oh so wise. Join us as we talk about everything from addiction and recovery to energy healing and how to cope with life in general. And for supporters of Bump in the Road, there's a behind-the-scenes part 2 available on the website. Sarah, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Hi there, Pat. Thanks for having me. So my name is Dr. Sarah Michaud, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialize in addiction and codependency. And I also have 40 years of sobriety. And that's one of my major bumps in the road was early on. I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I drank from the ages of only 16 to 24. I often say that I had an 8-year bender. But so I crashed and burned when I was 24. And I really thank the drugs for that because I probably could have drank forever. But when you're involved with drugs, usually the legal system gets involved, and the legal system definitely did get involved in my case. So I got sober at 24, which was the first major bump for me that I kind of got over. And I embraced recovery and sobriety like, oh my gosh, with such enthusiasm. I was just one of those people that felt like my life had been on hold. And so from the beginning of my sobriety, I just, I went back to school. I went to graduate school. I became a psychologist. I just really was living life to the fullest. I moved to California and I got married. I had a child and, had a practice in Boston here and worked at a major psych hospital and opened a treatment facility and became successful. And really, what ended up happening to me and why I ended up writing a book and I met Pat is that I was someone who specialized in addiction. I'd worked with patients for 30 years. I was married to someone in recovery. And my life was as I thought. I was living the dream. And what happened is my husband relapsed. And it's so strange when I think about it because you would have thought I would have been someone that would be the perfect person for this to happen to because I would be able to handle it. And the exact opposite occurred, which was when it happens in your own family, it's really, really hard to know how to handle it, even if you're an expert. And that's part of the reason I ended up writing a book and becoming so immersed in codependency recovery. And I went to Al-Anon for 20 years, and that helped somewhat, but really didn't give me the bottom line skills to cope with this situation. And my life really imploded. And, again, when you think of someone who's a psychologist with addiction and her husband is relapsing, you would think, oh, that's easy. Just tell him to get clean and sober. But it's not easy. And, addiction and codependency have such mental components. And part of the mental components of addiction are denial, minimizing, rationalization, all of these components where it tells you that you don't really have this illness. In fact, addiction is one of the few illnesses that tells you don't have it. That's what denial is. And codependency is the same thing. And I'll describe what that is also. But codependency is the same thing where you're with someone in a relationship with someone who's struggling either with addiction or some other mental illness. And you literally believe you're going to fix it. First of all, you believe it's your problem to fix, which it's not. And you believe you have some magical formula to be able to fix it and get out of it, which is delusional thinking, which is part of the illness. So, yeah, I guess it's just, to me, it was such a moment of, wow, if I'm struggling with this issue and I'm an expert, then the average human being has no idea how to navigate these waters. And that's why I really wrote the book. And I'm so adamant about helping people walk themselves through all this stuff. And, just briefly about codependency, I mean, the early definitions were really back in Bill W. and AA started in 1935, and his wife started this program, Al-Anon, which was based on, hey, the spouses and the families of alcoholics have issues too. And so they need help. So Al-Anon began. And then in the 60s and 70s, the word codependency and adult children of alcoholics came out, and all these books came out about growing up in addiction. And over time, why I really feel so strongly about it is it's not just about someone who lives with addiction. It really happens with most people, meaning if you're a parent, you may feel responsible for what your child does. If you're married, you may feel responsible or feel like you can fix what your spouse does. It's really about believing you can fix or change or control other people in your lives. And really what it's about is your own issues. It's not even about the other people. That's the delusion. So it's really about changing our own perception and our own behaviors and looking at our own histories that are contributing to stuff. So, Pat, what
You
part
bring
of that whole thing do you want to discuss?
Well, you bring up one of my favorite topics, which is control.
Yes.
What is
Yeah.
control? Why do we seek it? And is it an illusion?
Well, I believe it's absolutely an illusion. I mean, I would think, and I guess my theory about it is, and everybody's different. I mean, I think, first of all, being a human being, if you read any Buddhism or Pema Chodron, I mean, every Buddhist teacher talks about control. So it's not just codependence. But if you grow up in some kind of dysfunction or chaos, or you have parents who have depression or anxiety or addiction, or even just are people who are emotionally shut down, you may start living in this world where you feel like you need to control your external world. You can't. But what you will start to do is you'll develop these strategies and behaviors. So maybe you're someone maybe your father is angry all the time. So you start believing, okay, if I shut down and I people please my father, maybe he won't behave that way. So the child starts to believe that if I adapt and create certain behaviors or ways of beings or ways I am with my feeling states, then the people around me won't do their behaviors. So we start developing this delusion that I actually can control other people. And really what it's about is not being able to tolerate what's happening inside of us, which is our own fear. And of course, a child is going to develop those skills. And those skills are, brilliant when you're 5, 6, or 7. The problem is people don't realize that those adaptations are running us. And we keep doing them as adults. And so we get in relationships where we're trying to control these other people when really it's about not being able to be with ourselves. And you talk a lot about authenticity and being in touch with who we are. And the thing is, someone the other day said, focusing on other people is an anxiety management system. And I loved that because so many people who have this kind of underlying anxiety, one of the tools they think to deal with it is I'll focus on everyone else. And like you just said with control, it's this way we believe we're controlling outcomes when we're not. So, yes, huge.
Well, it is, and our whole society is based on some illusion of control. If
Yes,
you get this degree, if you go to this school, if you get this job, da 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 da. And
yes,
particularly as younger people, most of us buy into this. I think we're starting to see a shift in the economic landscape with younger people maybe questioning this type
yes,
of path. But
yes,
it goes
yes,
also to our left brain, right brain orientation. We're a very left brain oriented society. And
yes,
as a result, we miss that nonlinear wonder of
yes,
exploring things as they come.
yes. Yes, I mean, so much of it, so much recovering from codependency is how I describe it is it's getting more connected with yourself so you can be more connected with others and more connected with the world. And the thing with most human beings is as we develop, say we have painful experiences or experiences where we're hurt or we're full of shame or we're full of fear, we're going to start to shut down that part of us, the innocence, the vulnerability, the authenticity. We're going to start covering that up. And that's going to affect how we connect to others. And like you said, instead of having the source of our own joy and happiness and success be something inside of us that we can really feel, it's about getting, and this is really what addiction is. My happiness is based on some external source, like you just said. It's some external source, like the new job. I'm going to get married. I'm going to be happy. I'll get the new job. I'll move to California. Whatever it is, it's something outside of ourselves. Just like with codependency, the addiction is to a person. So it's just like with a regular addiction, this substance, this human being is going to do it for me rather than it's got to come from me.
But can
So, yeah.
codependency can't you be codependent on a profession, a job, a religion?
Yeah, I mean, you can be codependent on anything really because you're basically saying this thing outside of myself is going to make me happy. This job, when I can finally get to a certain point in this job, I'm going to be okay. And again, the problem with that is everything outside of ourselves is always shifting. Your job can change. Your husband can relapse. Your kid, something could happen to your kid. Things are constantly changing. That is life as we talk about it, right? We have bumps in the road. We have these things that are unpredictable. And it really is about adapting. And I think one of the most important things about codependency recovery is it's funny because I think in the beginning of each chapter, when I talk about the tools, I say, just pause and see if you can be with yourself for 5 or 10 minutes because so much of it is not reacting to what's happening inside of us and starting to learn to identify,
Yeah.
accept, tolerate, and experience our feeling states. And when you've adapted for so long and repressed for so long, it's so hard to even know what's happening. I mean, I've had clients for years that just stay busy every single second of their
Oh,
day because
they
they
drive
don't
me.
even know they can.
No,
Yes.
no, they don't pause, they don't reflect, they don't have no clue who they are. They're just constantly in motion.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
senseless motion.
Absolutely. And it's funny. I know people like this in my life today. And if I say to them, geez, have you thought about it's in their world, it seems to be the only way. And they may not even see that it's a coping skill. And there's not much I can do. I have relatives like this. There's not much I can do about saying, geez, and the patterns and the groundhog day, like the busyness and the detachment from self. And I may see that it's a way they're dealing with their pain, but they may not be able to see it.
No, I
So,
think the vast majority of people don't wanna turn their gaze inwards. They wanna
yes,
just they wanna just keep doing what they think is working, whether it's working or not, and
yes,
never question it. And I think that is such a wasted life, forgive me. But until you are willing to step out of your comfort zone, look at yourself as well,
right,
and then
right.
start taking some chances to explore some different realities,
I know.
what's life about?
Well, it's so funny you say that because so often in the world of addiction, someone will only do that when there's a crisis. And you wrote your book about these things, about
Yeah.
these huge crises in people's lives, crises. And it's so kind of sad in a way that it takes that sometimes for someone to get sober or someone to deal with their codependency. You would hope it wouldn't have to be that way. But I think when someone hits a crisis, they are forced to look inside. It's funny because when you're saying this stuff, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have steps, 12 steps.
Yeah.
And one of the steps is about a personal inventory. And I remember when I've done the personal inventory at different times in my recovery, I remember saying to a sponsor at one point, part of the inventory is looking at your anger, your resentments, your fears, and your sexual history, which is your shame. And I remember literally saying to a sponsor at 15 years of sobriety, I'm not angry. And and her saying, really? And let me just say, 486 resentments later, do you know what I'm saying? So it boggles my mind because even me, who was sober, who is in therapy because I'm in graduate school, who's done therapy, who's done tons of insight work, at the moment when she said that, I didn't even know that I had all that harbored resentment. So you think about that. I'm not someone even that I think is not in touch with myself. So sometimes I really think it's people asking the right questions or exploring in a certain way, or you do a certain workshop, or you meet a certain person, or you read a certain book, because it's really hard to even be aware that you're detached from yourself. Do you know what
I
I
think
mean?
yeah, we were
Yes.
talking about this before we started, and,
Yeah.
I'll just, speak to meditation a little bit as part of
Yes.
becoming aware, because when you get to that point where you can start to witness your thoughts,
Yes.
wow, that's a game changer.
It
Why
is a
do you
game changer.
think this? How real is it? Where does it come from? Why do I react that way? Do I want to react that way? It's fascinating what you start to see in yourself.
Yes, it is fascinating. I mean, I often say that 99% of my thoughts I'm just not interested in because so many of them are nonsense. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. When I started meditating years ago, when I got sober and got open to this and started practicing and started doing all these workshops and insight meditation, I began with like reading Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield and all those people. um the idea that, I mean, that's just such a huge game changer when you realize, oh, my thoughts are just thoughts, they're not necessarily reality. And you wonder about humans out there sometimes. It's like, do people actually believe their thoughts? Because they're so automatic and they're so insane. I mean, so one step is like getting to know that your thoughts are just thoughts. Now, feeling states to me are a little different because I think people struggle maybe more with tolerating that stuff. As a friend of mine says, really tolerating feelings is, at the worst, is just having experiences of intense bodily sensations. And in a way, that is true. But for some reason, we can grow up in a certain way and be terrified of having those intense bodily sensations, when I believe when we don't experience them, they are really blocked energy and they affect us the rest of our lives. And that's when we could talk about Joe Dispenza at some point. But yeah, I
Absolutely.
do think that really affects us.
Oh, I think it does too, and everybody has trauma. Trauma
Yes.
becomes blocked energy, and
Yes.
it starts to dictate your behavior. And
Yes.
when something happens that causes a strong emotional response in you, you have to
Yes.
pause and say, "Why is this happening?" And if you can dig down to the root of that and release that energy, that blockage, whether
Yes.
however you decide to do that, it's a game changer because now you have the methodology to do it again and again and again.
Yes. I mean, in my book, I think one of the longest chapters was on anger because, and I often say this also, and I don't know what your belief around this is, but I say 95% of the time we get angry, it's not about the present moment.
Oh,
And
no.
yeah,
Absolutely, I agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So what I call it an activation. And I guess how I can tell if it's an activation is and I know you've had this experience, when you have a feeling that's an extreme response to what's happening. So say I order a coffee, they give it to me wrong at Dunkin' Donuts, and I go into a rage. Okay, it's not about the coffee, right? So so but people live like that.
Yeah.
And I believe once you recognize, oh, this is the feeling I have when I have an activation, one tool that's really helpful is to have people look at the fear. I have a series of questions you can ask yourself. One is, what does this remind me of? Meaning, when have I had this same experience before? So
Yes.
sometimes when you kind of recognize, oh, wow, what does this situation remind me of? Oh, that person reminds me of my father or my brother who abused me or whatever. That's one question. The other question is, what fear what for and the other question is, what is the underlying fear? Like, am I afraid of being hurt? Am I afraid someone's not going to like me? Am I afraid someone's not going to meet my need? Am I afraid I'm not going to get what I want? Am I afraid of rejection? Am I afraid of abandonment? So you ask yourself, what is the underlying fear? And then you say, when is the first time I had this fear? What happened? So, very often, an activation is an old fear or experience that's getting activated in the present moment.
Absolutely. I had something like that happen to me recently.
Got
I
it.
was in a situation where I felt as though I was stabbed in the back, the knife was twisted, and the rug was pulled out from underneath me.
Got it.
And I was angry. I was so
Yes.
angry. And I
Yes.
looked at myself on a Zoom call and I saw the anger in my face.
Got it.
And it hit me so hard that one, this is not the way I want to behave. This is
Nope.
not what I want in my life. Why am I
What
reacting this
happened?
way? And I could
Yes.
go back and find all these instances in my life that were very similar.
Yes.
And it was really interesting,
Yes.
from my own perspective, and it
Yes.
really actually sent me into a bit of a depression and I'm not depressed, I'm a really happy,
No,
pretty
no, no.
well
Yeah, I
camper,
get that.
but it
Yes.
really got me depressed for about 3 months.
Got it. Do you know, like, if you look back to the earliest, like, wound of that incident, does something come to mind?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And this situation, whatever it was, activated that wound.
Yes, and it was
Yeah.
a compilation of a number of different, experiences, and
Yes.
that's why I reacted so strongly.
And did you look at kind of what are the thoughts or the belief systems that came out of it? And what is
Yes.
the and most likely, I also think underlying rage very often is unresolved grief. You know what I mean? Because I mean, we never get to feel the sadness and the wound from the beginning. And then it's just adding the protections, right? Yes.
Absolutely, grief, betrayal, uh,
Yes.
a lack of support, a lot of things,
Yes. Yes.
and those things hurt, and,
They definitely
we
hurt.
carry them with us throughout our lives, and I think when we hit an experience that has that strong emotional reaction, it is an opportunity, and
Huge.
we should not let that pass.
No, and you're so right. Like, if everybody could get skill, I mean, we could change the entire, landscape. But because so much of human beings right now are just activated about everything. But if people knew that, and this is codependency treatment as well, my anger is not about you. So when you're in a codependent dynamic, you're blaming everybody else for your feelings. And it's really not about them. So part of the piece of healing from codependency is saying, I am responsible for my feeling states. I'm responsible for this activation. It's so funny you're talking about this because when I published the book a couple of years ago, someone gave me the recommendation of this publishing attorney. And, for some reason, I needed to talk to them. And my brother, who's an attorney, got the name of this woman in New York, and she was really well known, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I make this phone call with her, and I'm on the phone with her 5 minutes, and I want to kill her. I am having this activation of such rage from what she's saying to me. And what happened, just like with you, what happened is she was very dismissive of me and kind of treated me very much kind of, at least this was my interpretation.
Mhm.
Like I was kind of, very low on her totem pole. And why was she even on the phone with me? And, but, this type of thing. And so when I got off the phone, I was in this rage and I called a friend of mine and I really got in touch with, she just reminded me of my father. I mean, it's very simplistic, but that whole tone of the dismissing, I'm nothing, like that, just her tone, within a minute, I was activated. So it's so critical that if you want to have peace and joy and contentment, like you say, this little piece of work in recognizing, gee, what are these activations about, are just huge to your own sanity, peace, you know,
Absolutely.
happiness in your world.
And
Yeah.
I think the other piece that's really critical is learning to find joy. Joy comes
Yes.
from within, and it is amazing. You can't get it through social media, you can't get it through a new pair of shoes, you can't get it through a new car or anything else you can think of. It comes totally from within.
Right.
How do people find joy?
Yeah, I mean, so much of the work I do and even my own studying in the last 10 years is around, and I'm sure with you and all your interviews, so much of it is around. My brother, who's a therapist, uses this term, which I think is brilliant. He says, pull the lens back. Pull the lens back, because so often human beings get into a little spiral, including myself, of some minutia of your day, and we totally get lost in this, what we believe is important, when if we pull the lens back and we start looking at everything, and the word is gratitude, of course,
Mhm.
and we start using a gratitude list, is a huge skill in the addiction community. It has been forever. Now everybody's doing gratitude lists. But and the word appreciation. When you can kind of shift your focus, and you talk about in your book, right? Shifting the focus from like being a victim, or seeing it as, some trauma you're having, when really, and I often say also, nothing is a 911. We think things are a 911 and they're really not. I mean, that's a whole other story. I would tell clients, only call me when call me when there's a 911, and people would call me all the time, because having a feeling apparently is a 911 for a lot of people. So, yes, it's just shifting the focus to gratitude, appreciation, love. I have a series of affirmations I do every morning to kind of shift my thinking. So, it's really important. Also, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, I'm just agreeing with you.
Yes.
I have found that a gratitude practice has it is in I do it every morning. I
Yes.
feel so strongly about it. It sets the tone for your
Absolutely.
day, and it sets your perspective of what's right, not what's wrong.
Amen. Yeah, and you can do a reset at any time during the day,
Yeah.
too. I mean, if you remember that gratitude, and if you remember that you can shift your focus and not get kind of going down that tunnel of negativity when one thing happens, it's a really good skill to practice.
It
Absolutely.
is. Something dumb. I tripped the other night. I'm moving, and there was some
Oh,
bubble
got it.
wrap, and my foot I didn't realize it was there, and boom, I
Yes.
went down hard. And I was in so much pain at first, I thought, "Oh my god, what has happened here?" But
Right.
I was okay. I was okay.
Yes. Yes.
But I had a choice. I could sit there and moan and groan,
Right.
and I really sat there and I thought, "Okay," I iced everything down, and the next day I was a little sore, but I was so grateful. Oh my
Yes.
god. I was so grateful that it wasn't anything much more major. I was grateful for about the way I went down. I was grateful that with a day off or so, I'm back to walking again.
Right.
And it's not that I'm Pollyanna or everything's perfect, but I do choose to orient myself toward
Yes.
possibility rather than
Yes.
tragedy.
You did a reinterpretation. I mean, again, and the thing that was great about what you just said is you didn't deny the feeling experience. You didn't. I
Oh,
think
it
there's
couldn't, it hurt.
absolutely. So it wasn't like you just kind of shut down and said, I can't feel this and I'm going to just cope with it and turn it around. Because I think sometimes that's a really delicate dance between, you want to acknowledge a feeling state. I don't think it's good to just shove it down or repress it, but then you can turn it around. It's like you have the feelings and then you say, okay, there's that famous line, You can interpret an event in a way to empower you or disempower you. You
Mhm.
choose. Do you know what I mean? And that's so true. Any event. You
Well,
know, I,
I
go ahead.
I tell people, write your story 3 ways, from 3 perspectives. You can do it from 5 perspectives, 10. Tell it from a perspective of anger. Tell it from a
Yes.
perspective of love. Tell it from a
Yes.
perspective of gratitude.
Yes.
Same story. You will see 3 totally different storylines, and they're
Absolutely.
all any of them can be real. What do you
Yes.
choose? And there are elements of truth in each one, but you
Yes.
don't have to buy into any one story.
Right. Right. That's interesting because it reminds me of this workshop I did years ago where the leader said, "Okay, take an event that you're still talking about. that you're that's still, whether it's your ex-husband or whether it's one thing that you still complain to people about." And basically, that day in the workshop, you wrote out your story and you read it over and over and over again to a number of different people. And by the end, you were so tired of your story and you saw how insane it was that it kind of liberated you to see it differently, because it's just, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what that is. It's like the need to be validated, and maybe we aren't validated at the time that the story happens or the event happens, so we need someone to really get it. But after a while, if we're still telling it, it's like, what are we getting out of telling that story? Do you know what I mean? So
When
you're absolutely right.
after, I was divorced, it was just life altering for me. It was very difficult. And,
Absolutely.
I decided, fast forward a few years, learned to fly. I've learned to fly this beautiful high performance plane, and I
Yes.
decide I'm going to go cross country with her, right?
Yes.
So I remember stopping, on the Pennsylvania Turnpike at a gas station, and this woman about my age or so was there, and we smiled at each other, kind of thing, looking at I was towing my sailplane in this
Oh
huge weird trailer,
my,
and she asked me what I was doing, and I went into my litany, which I won't even repeat here because I probably get sued for it. But I went into my litany of the end of my marriage, and I always ended it up. So I decided to fly airplanes without engines over unlandable terrain. And she stopped, and her mouth dropped, and then she started laughing, and we just laughed together. And
yes.
that moment was one of such release because it was a laughter of 2 women who had
Yes.
tread similar ground.
Yes. Yes. There is something very what would be the word? I mean, some people say it's almost like a spiritual break of a contract. I mean, that's something literally happens in the universe around divorces. Like, there is something just very, very deep and intense, I think, when you get divorced, and for a variety of reasons. And I remember when I was going through my divorce, and again, I'm working as a psychologist, I'm going to my meetings, and I was in such a rage for like those first 6 months. And I remember some woman coming up to me and she said, "Hey, have you ever done the steps in AA? Because of the resentments." And I literally had just finished them. And I remember thinking, like, okay, there's a disconnect here. Like, if I'm still talking about how angry I am, and at the same time, I do feel like there's this process. It's such a big lot. I was talking to my son about it the other night, just because he just broke his first love at 23. She just broke up with him after
Oh,
2 years. And we discussed that so much of it is not even the pain of losing that person, it's the pain of losing the fantasy of the future. And we talked about that. Like, when I got divorced from his dad, I had this entire future that I thought it was going to look like. And same with my son. He's 23 and he had this future he thought with this woman. And it's this grief around the loss of that future. Anyways, we could talk about divorce forever. Yeah.
no, but that's a really you bring up an important point in that with these fantasies, which we all have, it's a
Yes.
desire to control things. We're living for a life that will never happen
Yes. Yes. Well,
because
and that goes
fantasies never come true.
right. Right. It's so funny. It's almost like what's that saying about anticipation is 90% of the trip, or 95% of the
Yeah.
joy of the trip. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. It is, and I think there's a lot of unconscious fantasies going on, especially when you're younger, that you don't even realize are running you. Do you know what I mean? I have a good
Yeah.
friend of mine who's in her 50s and she's never been married, and she still has this fantasy about what marriage is. And I can't break that fantasy for her. But it's interesting because for whatever reason, even in her 50s, she has a belief about how it's supposed to be. And, that'll be her journey. But it is, we have these kind of thoughts about how it's all supposed to go. And you're right, none of it does. And that's why I think grief and loss, to me, at this age of my life, I start thinking that everything is about grief and loss, meaning, what to be your authentic self and to be grounded in joy is really to be able to process your grief, because everybody has grief. Everybody has loss. That is one of the commonalities of the human experience. And for whatever reason, I don't think people know how to process it or experience it or feel it and move on. And I think it's huge.
If you could leave people with 3 tips in terms of creating a more authentic life for themselves, what would you tell them?
Got it. Okay, so my first tip would be prioritize yourself, in the sense of, it's funny because in codependency work, the focus is so much on everybody else. And this sounds really simple, but self care and focusing on yourself is really the first step in codependency recovery, and to find joy. Because I believe if you know you're responsible, then you can do something about it. If you put your happiness in the hands of someone else, that's a recipe for disaster, right? So that would be my first thing. My second thing would be willing to tolerate discomfort, like you're talking about. Be willing to acknowledge your feeling states, which sounds so elementary, but it's like so many people I know and patients I've had for 30 years, to even just start identifying, geez, I'm feeling sad right now. Oh, I'm feeling some anger right now. Oh, I have some fear right now. To be able to stop and just acknowledge it and experience it, to me, is so much the recipe to be okay with yourselves. Because I think most people spend their lives trying to not feel, which is crazy when you think about it. I mean, when you think about it, human beings are born and we have feelings, and then we spend our lives trying to avoid those feelings. It's like the craziest paradigm.
No,
I
our
mean,
feelings are the energy that connect us, that propel us, that give us wisdom.
yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So identifying your feeling states, being okay with them, and also, and I guess there's many things, but one thing is, the mantra of recovery in my groups is, what do you want? What do you need? What do you want? What do you need? What do you want? What do you need? Because the mantra of a codependent is, what do you need? And what do you want? So, but when people get into my groups, they are unable to identify a need, which is shocking. But they're like, I don't get what you mean. And I'm like, okay, so the need for connection, the need to belong, the need to be understood, the need to be heard, all of these things, the need for physical contact. And it's almost like they need to be given a list to even start pointing out, oh, yeah, I guess I do need that. And to even start getting in touch with, and I give the example in the book, this is like a common example of, someone says to you, what restaurant do you want to go to? And you say, I don't care. Where do you want to go? And if you're someone who's constantly acquiescing, the thing about that is, sometimes you may not care, but sometimes you do care. And in those moments, say what's important to you. Say what your truth is. Because again, codependency is about focusing on what other people want, what other people need. And really, to be authentic is to know what you want and need and be able to communicate it. So, yeah, I think those would be my 3.